Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lupus Awareness Month. Today, we have an interview with my very good friend, Dr. Rachel Christensen. She has her PhD in experimental psychology. And just a little background on our relationship. We have been friends since we were 11 years old. So I've been with Rachel for the last 26 years. I absolutely love her. And I think that her journey through lupus and that diagnosis was the closest I've ever been to someone, and it just pulls at my heart every time. So I'm going to give you the floor and let you tell your story.
All right. I'm super excited to do this with you because, as Lindsey just mentioned, we've been friends for a very long time. She's been my medical go-to person ever since she started pharmacy school. For as long as, I can remember in my adulthood, every time I have any kind of medical thing, I text Lindsey and she tells me what to take. But in 2017, I started to get some really nasty symptoms that I couldn't really figure out answers for. Looking back on it now, I know that my lupus was triggered by a virus that I got in the beginning of that year of 2017. Funnily enough, it started all like when I was visiting Lindsey in Arizona. I had just come back from Belize from a trip, and I stopped on my way back home in Arizona for her baby shower. And I was feeling, pretty under the weather. Luckily, I was with a pharmacist, so she gave me all the medicine I needed. But when I got home, that just kind of continued, and I was sick for about 4 months, just on and off. Couldn't really, figure out. It was like a cold, and then I would get better, and then it get worse, and I had some gastrointestinal symptoms, and then all that went away, like in May of that year. But then I just started getting all of these weird, like, it's just these spots of inflammation that would pick up, and you'd have a horrific headache for a week, and then it would migrate down into your back, and my back muscles were spasming to the point where they would seize up, and I couldn't get out of bed, and I was calling my doctor for muscle relaxants. At one point, I ended up in urgent care several times because I thought, like, something is wrong. Like, this is an inordinate amount of pain. It must be something. I went to the orthopedic specialist one time because I thought I'd broken my foot. It hurt so bad. Like, I thought the bone had to be fractured.
Like you were limping, couldn't
Yeah, I
walk.
mean, it felt like it was like so deep in the foot. It wasn't like your typical like plantar fasciitis. I was like, there's got to be
Right.
something wrong. I couldn't even stand on it. And
Bone pain.
yeah, and the x-ray was just, it was fuzzy, so that, oh, maybe you bruised the bone. What did you do? And I'm like, I woke up. I don't know. And everywhere you go, every person you see, they just say, like, there's nothing physically wrong with you. Like, everything is fine. And so it was a very long, about 2 years of different doctors and going different places and trying to explain all of these weird symptoms that did not add up. And looking back at it now, it was inflammation, and that's what autoimmune is. It's attacking your body and causing all this inflammation. And for mine, it was just moving around everywhere. Like, it was just attacking all these different things. Finally, the turning point came in 2019. So after 2 years of all of this,
Okay.
my lymph nodes blew up. Like, I mean, I just woke up and they were like, you could visibly see them sticking out of my submandibular lymph nodes.
I
And
think you might have sent me a picture.
I probably did. And so I thought, obviously, I'm getting sick, right? I mean, your lymph nodes,
Right.
you're fighting something up. They stayed that way for 3 weeks, and they're so swollen to the point where I couldn't turn my head without pain. Like, the skin rubbing against them would hurt. So I would turn my whole body to check my blind spot while driving. And so, after 3 weeks of like, I'm still not sick. Like, I felt fine. It was just, they were so swollen. So that's when I went to my doctor, and he said, maybe it's autoimmune. Let's do it. Let's do the blood test. And that came back positive for anti-nuclear antibodies.
Antibodies.
Yeah, which then, you have to get a referral to a rheumatologist, which takes 4 months.
Yeah.
And then you have to, and then he ran some initial tests. He thought at first it was rheumatoid arthritis. That test came back negative. So I said, okay, well, now we do more tests. Well, it took another 3 months to get seen again.
Wait,
to get
they
follow-ups
didn't
on
just
that.
fast forward you in because you,
Nope.
okay.
And then, yeah, so I had to see then a second rheumatologist because it got kind of like lost in communication. Like their assistant quit, and so it wasn't really his fault, but I ended up having to wait to see a second rheumatologist whose specialty was more in like the elderly population, I feel, because his diagnostics were very much like, can you bend over and touch your toes? I'm like, well, yes, at the time I was 35 years old. So yes, I can touch my toes. He's like, then you're fine.
Well,
I mean, I'm really not, and I'd like to continue being able to touch my toes.
right. Like at 35, I don't just touch my toes. Like I want to go for mountain hikes. I live
Right,
in a
yeah.
very active area. I want
And so
to
he kind of just
walk
kept
my
blowing
dog.
me off. He refused to like fully officially diagnose it, even though like the follow-up test did show I had the antibodies. I had the Smith antibodies, which are like completely definitive for lupus. Like if you have Smith antibodies, you have lupus. Like you can Google that. But he was like, well, let's not put a label on it. Right now, we're just going to say you have a rheumatic disease process and we'll treat it as such. And really, you seem to be doing well because I could touch my toes. So at this point, we're going to say you're probably in remission. And I'm like, I am literally in pain all day, every day. Because at that point, the inflammation was just systemic.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt because now we're 2.5 years in, right? Because we're two, and he's treating you like an 85-year-old.
Yeah.
You can touch your toes. Yay.
Yeah.
When you say your whole body's in pain, so it's just like a burning sensation, joint pain.
Because when you think of like the burning and stuff, that's more like a fibromyalgia type thing, which he did also diagnose me with, which my current rheumatologist, he's like, I don't really believe, he's like, fibromyalgia is a real thing. He said, but for most of the patients out there, it's just a catch-all diagnosis. Like, we don't know what's wrong with you. We're going to say you have fibromyalgia.
Okay, like, so he hasn't really dropped you into that subcategory.
Yeah, not really, because I don't have that burning nerve pain. So my pain when it happens, when I have the inflammation, it's really hard to describe. But it feels like the inside of your body is like just pushing out, basically. And so all of your muscles are pushing out against your tissue, like that wants to like burst out. And so it's causing pain, right? I mean, and it's just, the muscle pain itself is like, after you've worked out, like say you do a whole bunch of bicep curls and your muscles are like painful to touch because of all the lactic acid and stuff.
Right.
It kind of feels like that, just systemically,
everywhere,
even if you're just sitting doing nothing. And then my skin will also feel like if you touch it, or even if I have clothing that brushes against it, it feels like someone's scraping sandpaper.
Yes, I've heard that symptom before.
And that was a pretty consistent thing. Like that was like my everyday 24/7 experience until my medication like really kicked in. And now it only happens when I'm in a flare up. So that's no longer an everyday thing.
Good.
Thank God.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No kidding.
But no, I guess backtracking a little bit. So my the first person to really diagnose me before I even got seen by a rheumatologist was a local nurse practitioner. I switched to her after I got my medical records from my original primary care physician, who I'd been seeing since I was like 15, and I really trusted him, and felt like he, had my best interest. But I got my records to transfer to the rheumatologist, and the very last note on the very last page said her symptoms are likely a manifestation of her depression. And yeah,
how did that how did that make you feel?
Because I mean, I felt very betrayed because I really trusted this doctor, and you know who it is.
I know,
but
I
have always I have always recommended people to this person because he really listens and stuff, and I don't know, it was very disappointing. And so I got a recommendation for a female nurse practitioner in town. And I walked into her office and she's like, so I looked at your file, and she had my positive ANA results. And she was like, I mean, it's pretty clear you have lupus. So
wow.
I'm going to refer you. And like her daughter has lupus. So she's like, she just immediately recognized it. She's like, I'm going to, send another referral to a rheumatologist and tell them like, no, enough of this months long waiting, like get her in. And she said, I'm going to start you on Plaquenil. Like, it's very clear that you have this. So she actually told me later that the rheumatologist called and yelled at her for starting me on Plaquenil.
Wow.
Like, that's not your place. She's like, I'm a physician, so it is.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And not only that, so here you are, you get to start the meds that don't kick in right away,
No,
but
it
at
takes
least you
about,
feel like,
yeah.
what did you feel relief? Like, how did you feel when she gave
It,
you
yeah,
something?
it's validation. Like, I'm not going crazy. Like, these are real things.
You're not crazy.
um, yeah, yeah. So it was very nice. And then my current rheumatologist, after my second one, was the guy's like, well, you can touch your toes, you're fine. And then he left. He moved back to Arizona. He went down to your
Oh,
neck of the woods.
we'll have to avoid him
Apologies.
down
Yeah,
here.
apologies for you.
I'm gonna need that name
But
later.
then, and so they're like, well, we're going to put you in with this new guy that we're getting in. And he just finished his fellowship in rheumatology at the Lupus Center in Washington, D.C. So I'm like really hopeful about this.
Yeah.
And he walks in, and this is the first doctor I've ever had in my life. Like, he walks in and I said, okay, so here's the timeline starting in 2017. And he just stops me. He's like, I read your file. And I was like, you did?
Oh,
Like, I've never had a doctor just be like, I already know everything about you. They always just be like, okay, tell me. It's like, no, I read your file. He's like, I don't know why the doctor wouldn't diagnose you. It's very clear that you have lupus, and we're going to continue treating you for lupus. And and he's like, what do you need? What can you not do that I need to make you be able to do? And so I've been working with him now for the last year and a half.
year and a half.
Yeah, yeah. And it's been really great. And so I've gone from checkups every 3 months to every 4 months to, at my last one, he said, I don't need to see you for another 6 months. So
Amazing.
yeah.
And when you had all of the turmoil and the ups and downs, and like, am I crazy? Am I not crazy? How does lupus change your everyday life then? And how has your
Yeah.
everyday life improved? So what was
Yeah.
it like?
I mean, back then, getting out of bed every day it was just horrible. Like, you wake up and your first thought is, ow. Like, that's just the very first thing you experience is some kind of pain signal from some part of your
Oh,
body. And then when you have to get up and moving, then more of your body starts to hurt. And so you just start your day off horribly. And then, I'm a teacher, so I come to work, I'm trying to put on, all this energy and get my students engaged, and I'm exhausted and I'm in pain. And it comes with this horrific brain fog. So you can't even remember your own name half the time. So I'm just
right.
loading up on as much caffeine as I can. I was on steroids for a while, but the doctor took them away because I was using them too much. I love steroids. It takes all the inflammation away, right?
Right.
And even like for your brain and stuff, it gave me like almost like a hypomania type of
Right.
thing. So I had energy, but apparently, heart disease and diabetes are not something that's worth sacrificing. So they took away my
And useful
steroids.
for flares, right? You want
Yeah.
it to
Yep.
be available for
I
flares.
take them for flares, which I don't get very often anymore. Luckily, like every once in a while, it'll get pretty bad, but for the most part, I'll just feel kind of like blah if there's a significant change in weather. The barometric
Right.
pressure plays a very large role in my flares personally.
You can probably
Um,
predict all the storms.
I can, yes, I am like a walking barometer. I can tell you, like, there was one time they predicted like we were gonna like 8 to 12 inches of snow, and everybody was panicking. And I looked at my fingers and I was like, no, they're not swollen. So I think they're wrong. Like, we're gonna get barely an inch. And I was right.
You're right.
Yeah,
What you got a second career if you want one. You're not
exactly.
teaching college kids.
Right.
So back then, how did people treat you when you didn't have your diagnosis?
Um, it it became difficult for all of us, and this is in no means trying to like, say anything negative about my social support system, but um you have to cancel plans all the time and you don't want to do anything. Even going like grocery shopping with my roommate, she'd be like, we're out of food, we need to go grocery shopping. And I'm like, I literally can't leave the house. The idea of walking through the grocery store, even for 20 minutes, it's too painful. Like, walking hurt. And so I couldn't do it. And
Do
that
it.
was, yeah. And that, was super frustrating. And then just canceling plans on friends. This is, of course, before COVID, right? Where it was
Right, right. Now we can
everybody had to
order our
cancel.
groceries to our house and
Um,
everybody Zooms for friend time.
right. But yeah, you were constantly canceling on people, and they're like, why can't you? I'm tired. I hurt, and they don't understand. Which I understand that they don't understand, because it's so hard to explain. Like, I am in so much pain. Well, have you gone to the doctor? Yeah, I've gone to the doctor. Well, what did they say? they say it's all in my head and that there's nothing wrong with me. And so then as a friend, you're like, okay, then let's go out and do something. And so I know it got very frustrating and hard for them. Also trying to be, good friends and understanding, which is part of, when I got that diagnosis, I did feel so validated. Like, see, I told you something is wrong with me.
It's not in my head.
Yeah.
And
and they've, and still, I adore my friends, love them, but I'm sure it was like probably good for them to be like, oh, good, our friend's not crazy.
Right. Okay. We can actually invite her now next weekend.
Yeah.
She's not nuts.
Yeah.
And you and I have also discussed mental health to the next level of counseling and all the trauma we've been through each other. I won't disclose your information, but mentally that had to be a big boost. I want to fast forward to now that, COVID is not in our complete hindsights, but we're vaccinated and able to visit people and see friends. Like once my little bear's vaccinated, we're coming to visit you.
Yay.
Yay. What is your cancellation rate now? Like say it was 80% before, how's life now?
It's pretty good. Like the flare-ups are very few and far between. I feel like I'm back to like my normal levels of functioning. I had to quit the symphony. I've played violin since I was 6 years old, and I had to quit playing for 1.5 years because I couldn't move my fingers. Like I literally could not move them fast enough, and my shoulders would hurt too much to even like hold up the violin. So I'm back to being able to perform. I'm teaching, my regular full load. I'm able to do activities. So, every once in a while I'll have a flare up where it's like, no, I'm sleeping today. But I would say it's down to like maybe 1 a month, maybe even to 1.5 months, depending on what the weather's doing.
Right. What season are we in?
Yeah. And it's funny because when it does flare up, it's almost like I had forgotten how bad it used to be. Like when it gets really bad, I'm like, oh my gosh, I used to like experience this every day, every hour of every day. And I don't know how I made it through. Like my mental health was not good. I joined a pain group, a chronic pain group. I was doing therapy. But for a very long time, it felt very hopeless. Like there was no end in sight. And if you have to think like, I was 35 at the time. So it's like, I've got another 40 years, let's say, of pain every day. Like I didn't want to do it.
It's suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
It's suicidal.
Yeah, it was passive, but it was there and it was hard. So yeah, once the medicine finally started to really kick in, and I learned some other techniques for coping, which we should talk about how you've helped me.
Let's talk about
the whole point of doing
what
this,
happened
right?
there.
Sorry, I get lost in the story. So yeah, you started your well, even before you had started Wellness Farm D, you were helping me just with take these vitamins, take some supplements, try to do what you can to feel better. But then you started up, and I think you had me taking like 14 different pills to start with.
But you needed them.
I did, and I actually I was very proud of myself. I had kept up with it. But yeah, that we were on omegas and vitamins and stuff for sleep, probiotics.
Your adrenal support.
Yeah, adrenal support. There was
because being on all that caffeine had killed your adrenal function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a big build back.
Yeah, and so I was not skeptical because I trust you wholeheartedly, but at the same time, I'd been in so much pain. I'm like, I don't know if these vitamins are going to help, but I really think it did. I think that in combination with the hydroxychloroquine, the Plaquenil and everything, kind of got me back to that level of normalcy where my body could kind of like, I don't know, to support itself. Right. Because my immune system still tries to, attack me all the time, but at least I've got some other support that's been built in. And you've talked to me, we've done a lot with diet, trying to eliminate a lot of things. Sugar is like the biggest thing for my body. When I eat a lot of processed sugar, I'm pretty inflamed the next day. So I have to be very careful with sugar, which sucks because I'm like addicted to sugar, as most people are. So it's something that Lindsey's helping me with. And exercise was a really tricky one at first because exercise does make me feel better, but it hurt to exercise like so much. Like even, like I said, walking around slowly in the grocery store was painful. But once we got the supplements going and everything, and I got to a level of manageable pain, then a walk would help, and I would and doing stretching and stuff was very beneficial to reducing that inflammation. So yeah, just being able to work with you to kind of figure out those diet changes that needed to be done, how I could ease into the exercise without causing pain. All of that just kind of really helped to solidify the healing process.
And I think you're the prime example of it doesn't happen overnight,
No.
because you took 2.5 years to where we got a diagnosis. And before that, I was like, okay, this is going to turn down your inflammation. We know you're inflamed. It's autoimmune. I think I mentioned at one point in a text message, are we sure this isn't lupus? It sounds like lupus. And you had said, no, I don't have a butterfly rash. And I was like, okay. But we come to find out that, there are people with and without rashes. And I think you mentioned kidney function can be one thing as well earlier before we started recording. And then being the long haul patient. So we got you on the support. Now you're down to way less than 14 capsules a day.
No, I'm just really doing the omegas, the multivitamin, and the probiotic.
And the probiotic.
Yeah, just
and that's exactly what the goal is, right? Most people should be on omega, probiotic, and a multi. Gut health, and then omegas for neuro, brain, joint, inflammation, and then multi because we don't have the greatest food anymore. And Rachel, we did one of your follow-ups was a couple months ago, and you had improved by like 70% or something. I mean, when we looked at actual numbers
of how I was feeling in terms of fatigue and stress and anxiety. It was crazy different. And
your caffeine consumption was incredible. Like it was the peak, and then now you're like, I have a Coke Zero, like, or I have one coffee.
And like I told you, like that's mostly just because I love the taste. Like I just wanna, just really want it. But I went from like one of those huge travel mugs of coffee just to get through like my morning class, and then at its peak, I was coming in to work, drinking a full thing of coffee, and then I would leave after my morning class at 1 p.m. and I would go home and take a 3-hour nap. And then I would get up and try to do some grading, and then that would be it. I wouldn't be able to leave the house. That's how bad the fatigue was.
Yeah. And I don't know anybody, I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but like you give me one of those giant things of coffee, I'm not sleeping for 3 days. Right. You were that tired.
I was, it was horrible.
So for the management plan for you, like what is your current management plan with your doctor, and what advice do you have for anybody who's watching this?
So right now I'm just on the Plaquenil. I have a prednisone on hand that I can take during a flare-up. And we basically do like a 5-day taper down. So I'll start with 15 milligrams and do 15, 15, 10, 10, 5, 5, or some variation of that depending on how I'm feeling. But I take 400 milligrams of Plaquenil a day, and I get my eyes checked every 6 months because Plaquenil can build up in the retina and cause toxicity. But I'm at I'm very lucky that I happen to be at that perfect weight. Like if you divide it out, like, milligrams per kg that you're supposed to take, I'm like at exactly the 400 milligrams that you're supposed to have. It's like 395 or something like that. So I'm doing really good in terms of eye health with that. And it's managed pretty well between the supplements that you've got me on and that. Everything's going really well. My blood work is good. My kidneys are doing great. Mine seems to just be musculoskeletal. It's not affecting my internal organs. Awesome. I don't have the skin, like you mentioned, I don't have the rash. Some people get these discoid lesions on their face, which I did start to get. And I had these little they almost looked like they were like whiteheads, but they weren't pimples. I would get these little bumps all up my eyes. With that, and then I was getting some lesions on my temples, but those went away when I started the Plaquenil, and I was getting blisters on the sides of my fingers that went away when I started. They weren't like painful blisters, they just were these raised blister-like things, and if you poke them, stuff would come out, but it wasn't friction blisters, so they didn't hurt. They just appeared. It was weird. I sometimes forget about all of the little symptoms that I've had throughout the years.
Right.
I start talking about it. But yeah,
What
so yeah,
advice would you have?
the advice that I have is to just advocate for yourself, because if you just go to a single doctor and they say, "Oh, it's all in your head," and you believe them, then it's just going to take even more time. And I went to doctor after doctor after doctor demanding answers, and it still took me 3 years.
Right.
So just if a doctor blows you off, and just be like, "Thank you for your time," go to the next doctor, which I know is hard, especially if you don't have insurance. So I mean, with that, I hope for your sake that you can, get, the government
Insurance.
insurance or whatever it might be. But just keep going, and demand answers and be like, no, this is this is not a symptom of mental health. It is affecting my mental health. But there is something physically wrong with me, and you have to figure out what it is.
Because we know ourselves better than anyone else.
Yeah.
You know you better than anyone else knows you.
Hmm.
And don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give
Don't
up.
give up, and set your boundaries with people. Don't let people pressure you into going out and doing things when it's going to negatively affect your physical well-being and your mental well-being. That's been the hardest part.
I bet, because you don't want to let people down.
Exactly. Yeah. But
But
yeah, and get into therapy. Therapy's been big.
therapy, wellness consulting, don't give up.
Yep.
Mental health.
Yep.
Say no. Say no. I love it. I think saying no is something we could have a whole Wellness Wednesday on.
Yeah.
Good topic advice.
Yeah. No problem.
Anything else you want to tell everyone before we wrap up?
I don't think so. The advocacy was the big thing that I really urge people, because a lot of people, I've been very open recently about my diagnosis. When it first happened, it was almost like a shame thing, like there's
Oh.
something wrong with me, which is something I've worked through very much in therapy. When I first told my therapist, like, I don't want people to know. I don't want my colleagues to know. I don't want other people to know. And she was like, why? It's not your fault that you have lupus. And I was like, good point. It's fair.
I don't know why.
Yeah. So I've been much more open about it. And so lots of people have come to me, like, hey, I have these weird symptoms. Do you think it could be this? And I'm like, look, I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying you should go see one. And if they say, probably not, you demand a blood test. Like, they can't deny that. Just say, no, I want you to test my ANA. Get an ANA, find out if you have anti-nuclear antibodies, and then go from there. Because I think more people have autoimmune diseases than are diagnosed, because the doctors just blow it off. Like, it's just a weird number of symptoms that can't be real. I've never read about that. I've never heard of it. It's not real. So
I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up here, and I'm going to hit the button, and then I'll talk to you some more. Okay. Thank you so much, Rachel.